just one word of introduction. So thank you, Jaime, that you are joining us to present today. The topic is very important to many people. As I can see, we have like close to 60 participants right now, but also to myself. I can definitely relate to yourself being like a few months with the company. I read like close to 8 months. Myself being close to 5. And yeah, I'm also in the process to quickly onboarding myself to such organization. And yeah, I'm definitely very excited to hear your words on how did you do with that and like the rest of the topics. So I'm giving the word to yourself.
Okay, thanks a lot, Michal. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. I cannot see anything that's happening on Zoom. I don't know how many people we have. I don't see a chat or anything. So please.
Close to 60, yeah.
All right, cool. So yeah, like welcome to this talk that I've called Landing on Your Feet as a Staff Engineer. First, okay, I would like to go through a quick intro of myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jaime Sanchez. I am currently a staff engineer at Glovo, and my previous role was a senior software engineer at Amazon, where I spent 6 years, right? At Glovo, I joined at the beginning of this year, right? So I've been here for about 8 months. Okay. In terms of like strengths or kind of like areas where I'm comfortable, right? I could say distributed systems and backend in general. That's where I spent most of my career, right? And in terms of growing areas or growth areas, I have a lot, right? And speaking in public is one of them. I would just like to, narrow this down. So I'm here just to put myself into a growth spot as well, right? And in terms of like personal facts, I have 2 kids. The older one is 4 years old. The little one is almost 2. And they are both lovely kids, but they sleep very badly. And I haven't slept properly, like a straight 8 hours in the last 4 years. But I guess I'm accustomed to that. So yeah. All right. So let's discuss the agenda very quickly. I have 2 parts today. So the first one is, this is me trying to help people understand the staff role, not just within Glovo, but I guess like in general, right? And out of warning, I'm trying to understand the role myself a little bit every day, right? To understand it a little bit more every day. Okay, so this is a learning process for me as well, right? And then the second part of the agenda is, I will discuss more or less the process that I followed to ramp up as a staff engineer when I started here at Glovo. But my goal with the second part is just, to put some learnings or things that can be useful for any individual contributor, regardless of the level, right? That is changing context, right? That maybe you're transferring to a new team or to a new cluster or to a new group of teams or to a new company even, right? Regardless of your level, right? So hopefully some of the things that I did, might help you out, right? All right, so let's jump into the first part, which is understanding the staff role. Yeah, like as I said, my personal opinion is that up until very recently, there were not like enough resources out there, let's say, diving deep into, what is the role like for a staff engineer and above, right? And that, like as a result of that, there are some misunderstandings or, like people don't have very clear what are the responsibilities of a staff engineer, blah, blah, blah. So I'm gonna kind of like give you, my view of things, all right? After 8 months on such a role. So first I have here, like, we're gonna talk like the typical career path for an individual contributor, right? Like, of course, this is different from company to company, but after you looked at a few of them, right? Like there are some common levels for a software engineer, right? So typically you start as a junior or graduate engineer, right? This is like an entry-level job. You just come fresh from uni or maybe from a different background. Maybe you decide to go programming or you do a boot camp and then you join as a software engineer in some company. That is entry-level job, right? No experience. Then you kind of graduate to a normal engineer, right? You drop the junior from your title and you're software engineer or programmer. Then typically you move into a senior engineer position. And then you jump into the part where I think it's the most obscured for most of the people, which is you typically progress into staff, then principal, right? And then something that I'm calling demigod, right? Like I haven't found like a lot of common terms, let's say, for something beyond principal, right? What I've seen is things like technical fellow or distinguished engineer, things like that, right? And this is more or less like the typical career path, right? Again, can vary company from one company to next, right? So let's look at these levels very quickly in terms of like the expectations, right? Of your performance, what you do, right? And you can look at the level expectations from many dimensions, but I'm going to choose the 3, right? So from the scope of your work, right? Like what is your impact radius, let's say, your outputs, what artifacts do you produce, and the level of ambiguity that you deal with on a daily basis, right? Meaning, how clear are your tasks, what you have to do next, right? How clear is that, right? So if we look at the junior or graduate engineer, right, in terms of a scope, is pretty reduced, right? Your scope is typically your team. Whatever you do, benefits your immediate peers, right? People who sit with you, let's say. In terms of outputs, typically what you produce is code, right? And then in terms of ambiguity, you have none or very little, right? So typically people understand this is your first job, right? So especially at the beginning, right? What they're going to give you is like a bunch of Jira tasks that are like super well defined, like exactly what you have to do. And it's a matter for you to find, where to place the code, let's say that solves that particular issue, right? Then when you move to like an engineer, right? The scope stays typically the same, right? Like the team, and the output is same as before. You still produce code, right? And maybe you start to produce some documents, right? So maybe you start documenting some, I don't know, APIs that are public, or you start drawing some diagrams for some of the systems that your team owns, etc. Right? And when it comes to ambiguity, you have some, right? So it's still pretty clear what is it that you should be working on, right? But maybe you don't have 100% of the details, right? So maybe there is like a corner case that is not, let's say, covered by your product manager or whomever is your business counterpart, right? And you might need to clarify with them, right? But it's fairly clear, right? What you should be working on, right? Then normally by the time you reach the senior engineer position, your scope increases and it goes beyond your team, normally for the first time, let's say, right? So maybe what you do impacts three teams, more or less. In terms of outputs, same. Coding, documents, and maybe you start doing some mentorship, right? You've been in the industry for some time. You might be interested in helping people on their personal growth, and you start like mentoring some of them. And in terms of ambiguity here, I found that you start dealing with a fair amount, right? So like the areas that you should be focusing on are more or less clear, right? But the way or like the specific problems, like the way you solve those problems, etc., is, let's say, like completely up to you, right? It's like you have, kind of like not decision making or like at least proposal making power, let's say, right, at the senior engineer level, right? And then for the rest of the levels on the right, just a little bit of kind of like warning, I want to treat them as the same, right? Because I don't have time to cover them all. And second, I'm only staff engineer, so I cannot really speak for principal and the demigod levels. Okay. So here, right, on this kind of like right part of the line, right? Typically your scope increases a lot, right? So your impact goes beyond 3 teams. It can even go into the company level, of course, right? Your outputs, right, typically the same, code, documents, mentorship, but now you add like a lot of feedback, right? Feedback on other people's system designs, feedback on other people's performance, sometime even, right? Feedback on certain processes that are running on your, on your group of teams, right? So you spend a lot of time providing feedback in different ways, right? And when it comes to ambiguity, there is a lot, right? And again, this is based on my own experience, right? And the fact that you experience such an ambiguity happens because of this, right? Because typically, on many companies, once you reach the staff and beyond, right, those are already considered like leadership positions, right? You're supposed to be leading. You're not supposed to be, let's say, like following, right? Things that have been thought for you, let's say, right? So essentially, when you reach this level, staff and above, you jump into a world where there is a lot of autonomy, right? You can do, let's say, whatever you want to do, right? Not the quotes, please. But yeah, that comes at a cost, right? And the cost is like, like your manager is not going to tell you exactly what is it that you need to be doing next, right? It's kind of like up to you to discover those things and be able to prioritize them, right? So it is more or less like a very summarized, very simplified vision of a typical career path in terms of like the levels and the expectations, right? But now let's look at, like the areas for growth or the skills that you need to develop, again, like typically, right, to move across this line, right? So in my experience, what I've seen is from junior to engineer, you need to get very good at translating ideas into code, right? You more or less have on your head, like, how do I solve this, right? And then like putting that into code that is maintainable, that, passes certain standards, it's easy for you, right? You become proficient at it. You should be able to work with no support, right? This is not by any means to mean that you don't work on a team, right? It's just like your task, you're able to, to get it done more or less with little support, okay? And normally you become proficient with good practices, things like CI/CD or whatever, right? Unit testing, things like that, okay? Then normally from an engineer into the senior position, what usually happens is you've proven yourself on the system design arena, right? Like you had a big problem or a big system that your team needed to implement. You propose a design, align different views, different opinions, and then help the team on implementing, sorry, on building the system and maybe rolling it out into production. And then, as I said, right, as senior engineers typically do mentoring as well. So you've probably, have an interest of helping others, and you've taken some mentees and work with them, right? And now, again, I'm treating the 3 boxes to the right as one block for this, right? When you move from senior engineer to staff and above, these are the skills that I found, are also needed, right? Not a comprehensive list, just some of them, right? So to be a kind of like proficient staff and above engineer, right? I believe you have to have a minimum level of writing skills, right? Because on these levels, you're supposed to have impact at the scale, right? And what that means in some occasions is you should be able to scale your ideas, right? And the best way that I found, at least, to scale your ideas and disseminate that information in a scalable way is to writing them down, right? And you want to write those things down, so if someone reads those, it's pretty clear what you're trying to say. So that's where the writing skills come along, right? You need to start like managing stakeholders. For example, some of the things that you want to lead or that you're interested in leading, right, might require you to sit down with a director that is not technical, for example, and discuss your technical problems in a way that this person can follow you, even when he or she doesn't have a technical background, right? So that is also a skill set, like translating all your code and stuff that you have in your head, right, into things that a normal human can understand, let's say. You need to be able to provide good feedback. And by this, I don't mean to provide positive feedback. What I mean is your feedback should be actionable, based on data, right? You should be very good at identifying problems, right? As I said, you're going to work with a lot of autonomy. No one is going to tell you what to do, right? So some of the problems, you might have some, how can I say? You might have some North Star, let's say, of like things that might be important, but there might be some other problems underlying that no one is looking at, no one has seen before, and you should be able to kind of like catch those, before they become a big problem, let's say, for your group of teams. Again, working autonomously, and then you need to be able to make things happen. And what I mean by this is you need certain skills that, help you on aligning people in a way that they collaborate with you, right? You're an individual contributor, right? You're staff engineer or principal or whatever, but you're working on things that are super big, so you're not going to be able to tackle them on your own on a timely manner, right? So you need to get traction from different engineers or even engineering managers to help you out on things, and that is like a type of a skill that it's unique on its own, right? But then, regardless of the specific skills, what's very important for me, or I think what's interesting for me, is like if you look at what takes you from the very left to the 2 or 3 second boxes, right? Those are like mostly technical skills, right? And on the right, they are like other types of skills, right? Like typically the soft skills, right? And by this, right, I'm not trying to say that once you reach the staff level, you should stop investing on your technical skills, like not at all, right? That is for sure, like you need to keep on that, right? But it gets to a point on your career where if you want to keep moving levels, let's say, right, you need to start investing on other types of skills that you never thought that were important when you started as a junior engineer, right? You need there's a point where there is more return on investment if you invest on some of these soft skills, right, than if you learn a 4th or a 5th programming language, for example, right? And yeah, I think this is what takes me to the hot take of this presentation, or my hot take at least, which is, in my experience, in my story where I live so far, for me, like moving to staff is probably equivalent at changing your role. Like your day-to-day life is so much different than at least it used to be for me, right? So yeah, you're still an individual contributor, right? But the way you contribute is slightly different, right? Sure, like people, let's say, want you around for your technical knowledge, right? And your programming skills and so on, right? But they also need you for other things that are equally important, right? They need you to decide, or to help maybe break a tie on a calibration process for a promo, for example. They might need you to, to provide your feedback on certain processes, right? They might need you to help an engineer find opportunities for growth, like problems that they can work on so they can move to the next level, right? So yeah, the way you contribute is slightly different, right? The second thing is like the feedback loop that you have is way longer. At the beginning of your career, right? You typically pick up a task from your Jira project, you work on it, write some code, the test, right? Submit a pull request, someone merges it, and it gets to prod. And that loop kind of like happens within maybe hours or or maybe a few days, right? Depending on the task, right? But when you're a staff engineer and above, right, you work on things that are quite big, right? And because they're big, they require, first of all, like a lot of talking, right? A lot of like aligning interests, right? And making sure like people understand the importance of what you're proposing, and they kind of like, move along with you, right? So that is something that takes a lot of time, but then the execution itself also takes time, right? Because, think of something like breaking up the monolith, right? That's going to take a lot of time, right? And if you're leading one of these things, right, your feedback loop will close, like the moment where you start seeing results, will close in maybe weeks or months, even semesters sometime, right? And then again, the final thing for me is like, kind of like related with the previous slide, is like, the tools that you use every day are a little bit different, right? It's not like you don't use your ID anymore, right? Like not at all, you'll see later, right? But you need to kind of like use a different skill set or have more tools on your belt, right? Because the whole key thing here to make things happen as a staff and above is to be able to influence people around you without the authority, right? You don't have anyone reporting to you, right? You cannot tell people, hey, stop whatever you're doing and now work on this because I think this is important, right? You need to, make sure that you convince people with data, good arguments, etc. Right? And that again requires some tools, some skills that are not technical necessarily. All right. And just to put like my theoretical views away and bring this down to earth a little bit, I just want to give you a quick example on my 8 months that I've been here as a staff at Glovo, right? So I'm just going to summarize by category, let's say, very quickly, like some things that I've been involved with, right? So I've been involved in processes, right? So for example, before we had like a good way to measure the OKRs for the monolith extraction in general company-wide, right? So I put together some KPIs that made sense at the time for my teams at the cluster, at the growth cluster. I worked on the putting together an operational excellence review weekly within the cluster and revamping the on-call process. Then I've also worked on things related to feedback, right? So promotion processes, RFCs, technical designs, pull requests, you name it, right? In terms of people, right? Like I've had some things that I've done that have to do with helping people out, right? Like I was getting nothing out of this, right? But I have like regular one-on-ones with certain individual contributors, and I get to know them and I get to know their interests, and when I feel like, or when we feel that they're ready for more, like having impact maybe beyond their team. I've helped like finding these opportunities for people, right? But then I've also had like hands-on contributions, right? Like by this I mean like actually writing code, right? So just to summarize, right? Like so, I've been here for 8 months, and I would say like more or less like 60 to 70% of my time has gone on things that are not directly, related to coding. Okay, and this is just the important message from this part of the session, at least for me, is that again, moving to staff is like a change of role, and I don't think that people generally have that visibility, right? I feel like some people, they want to keep growing to the next level, right? Because it's just the next thing in front of them, right? And I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it's perfectly fine if you want to pursue a staff level, right, and above. It's just try to understand the role before you go crazy. I've had a friend back in the past who kind of like got promoted up to a level that, let's say, like he didn't like anymore, and he had to voluntarily ask for a demotion to go back to the previous level, right? So yeah, that's it. This is the first part of the talk. All right. Hopefully that shed a little bit of light of like the kind of work that we do on a day-to-day basis, the skills, let's say, that we've had to invest on over the past, and yeah, like the sense of impact that we're supposed to have. Okay. Yeah, now we're moving on to the second part, which is ramping up as a staff engineer. So here, as I said, I want to discuss typically my plan for onboarding on Glovo. But I want to do it in a way where hopefully this is useful for any person who is changing or planning to change context, right? And by that, what I mean is someone who is moving from one team to another, from one cluster to another, from one company to another, right? Hopefully these things, or some of them, will help you out if you're going or thinking about going through that process soon. Okay, and like adapting and ramping up in a new place. So quick look at the last, let's say, steps of my journey, right? So prior to joining Glovo, I was working at Amazon, right? I was senior SD at Amazon. A senior SD is kind of like a technical lead. So I was working. I was contributing, let's say, or helping two teams. These two teams are what at Amazon are called like 2 pizza teams, which are typically the size of what 2 pizzas can fit, right? So as many people as 2 pizzas can fit, right? So something in between, I don't know, 7 to 10 engineers on each of the teams, right? So I was working with about, I don't know, 15 to 20 people on a daily basis. And also I was coming from a point of, let's say, advantage, let's say, as a technical lead, because I grew into the role, right, within these 2 teams. So I started, let's say, as a regular engineer, right? And then I worked on these teams like for maybe 1 or 2 years, and then I got promoted to technical lead, right? So even when I got like a promotion, right, like the context was more or less the same, right? I knew everyone, I knew all the context on all the decisions that we made, right? So yeah, that was more or less what I was, right? And then at some point I decided, it's time for me to move on, right? And then I, interviewed for Glovo, landed here, right? And on my first days, this is where I got, right? So, I went from an environment where I had, to know a little bit about 2 teams, right? To an environment where I had like 8 to 9 teams, right? With a total of like 70 people, right? Versus 15 to 20 engineers that I had back at Amazon, right? So that means that if there were like 8 teams, let's say, right, here Global, right, like at any given moment in time, if I pause, there are at least 8 things that are being developed, right? At least like 8 roadmaps, right? At least, like 8 engineering managers, et cetera, right? So very soon I realized that, what I was doing before at Amazon, the way I was organizing my work, etc., because I started with that position of advantage, as I said, right? So whatever I was doing there, it wouldn't work here, right? If I wanted to become effective as quick as possible, I had to put some structure to it, right? Like there is no way in hell I'm going to be able to, keep up with the 8 roadmaps and the 8 problems at the same time, right? So I need to put some structure to this, right? To this onboarding, right? So what I did is I kind of like did whatever, what we typically do as engineers, right? I took the problem and I broke it down in pieces, right? Yeah, well, I had a little bit of like a moment of stress until I put the plan together, right? So yeah, kind of like a sliced, right? My onboarding process in 3 stages. Don't mind about the days or anything here. Like I just put them there, but I think they're not accurate at all, right? But let's say I broke it down in 3 pieces, right? Early stage, that's when I joined, right? Maybe first days, right? And then the later stage, which is hopefully a point where I thought I was, adding value, right? I was kind of like proficient, right? And then the middle stage, which is whatever goes in between, right? And then what I did is for each of these stages, I set up some goals, and for each of the goals, I set up some actions, right? And then I want like, okay, let's see if this works, right? So we're going to look at these stages one by one, right? So in terms of the stage, I had 3 goals, right? So first of all was understanding my new role, right? As I said, I was coming from a position where I didn't have a lot of visibility into what a staff engineer was specifically at Glovo, right? So, depending on your company, they have different expectations. I wanted to ask people around and get context on the space of the teams that I was working with. Sorry. So here at Glovo is the cluster of teams that's called growth, right? And then I wanted to build my own context. And let's see the action that I took for each one of these. So in terms of like understanding your new role, right? So you're joining a new company, or even if you're switching, even if you're, I don't know, maybe you're promoted within your same company or whatever, right? You're jumping into a new role, right? Or if you keep the role, let's say, and you don't go from one company to the same to a different one, right? It's a new role, even if the title is the same, right? Because on the new company, they might have different expectations, right? So yeah, you need to understand like where is expected for you, how is your performance going to be evaluated, how do you get feedback if you're doing something really wrong, right? Especially at the beginning. So those are the things that I wanted to clarify. So I did 2 things, right? So here is first of all, I got myself, the link for the competency model, right? So this is something that happens at Glovo, but also in many other companies, right? So typically on each of these companies that have like a tech organization, there is like a document or on an Excel sheet or something, or something that describes for each level as a software engineer, right? What is it that you're supposed to be doing, right? What are the expectations, right? And it's kind of like documented there, right? So I got a hold of that link, right, to the competencies model here at Glovo, and I kind of like read a bunch of times through it, right? Not only on the staff level, but also on the previous ones to understand, what is expected at this level. And then I did another thing, which was, like, sure, like the competencies are the theory, right? Like this is essentially, like what people, should be doing, right? But I wanted to see exactly what is it that all the staff engineers were actually doing, right? So what I did is I interviewed a bunch of them. I actually wrote a script for an interview, right, with a bunch of questions that I don't remember, but things like, hey, I don't know, like how do you interact with your manager typically, or how do you prioritize the problems or the things that you're focusing on? I don't know, how do you get people to collaborate with you, right? Things like that. And I had like a 3 or 4 sessions and I took notes, right? And that was like super useful because it helped me translate, let's say, what was on the competency model into, oh, these people are working like this, right? And I could actually like piggyback on some of the things that they did that I liked and I thought it would be useful for me. So yeah, that was right. And yeah, I'm gonna share as we go. I'm gonna share some artifacts, let's say, of these things that I did, right? So the first one, and I'm sorry, it's in Spanish, right? It's a screenshot of a Slack message that I had with my first manager here at Glovo, right? Where he was replying to me saying, hey, like these are the competencies that you asked for, right? Like the link to the document, right? And this was on March the 2nd, which was my first day at Glovo, right? So that means that I must have asked for this on my very first day, right? So that is how important I felt, that this was, right? Like to have a clear understanding from day one of what is it that I should be doing, right? Or how I should behave, let's say. All right, so next one is, getting context on your space, right? So sure, you jump into a bunch of teams, right? You're gonna support them and help them out, right? But do you know what they do, right? What system do they own, right? What features do they support? How do those features, right, translate to the business, right? And how do they impact the business? And what's the user experience like, right? These things are important because once you've ramped up, especially if you're like a tech lead or above, right? You're gonna help people out on making decisions, right? And for you to be able to do the right, trade-off analysis of different possibilities, you don't need to only know about the technical part, right? But you also need to know, whether you might be affecting some piece or some metrics of your business, right? By doing something, right? So those things are important as well for you as an individual contributor, right? To understand your business and the user experience, right? So what did I do here? Same as before. I interviewed a lot of people, right? So I interviewed product managers, EMs, engineer managers, and at least one engineer per team. That was within my very first weeks, right? Again, I wrote separate scripts, right? So a script for an interview for a PM, a script for an interview for an EM, and for engineers, right? I covered different topics, right? With PMs, it was, UX, features, business. With EMs, it was more like people-related things and processes within the different teams, right? And with engineers, we actually go through, we went through whiteboarding, like walking me through the code, that kind of thing. And yeah, what I'm showing you here is just essentially, the notes I took when I had one of these interviews with one of the engineers in this team. In this case, it was like the vouchers team. And here, this is like a byproduct of all of these kind of like conversations that I had, right? So don't worry too much about the screenshot itself. It's just like essentially I was capturing here, a screenshot of the different notes that I have on the different people that I work with on my first days, right? So there were a lot of people. And essentially the byproduct here, the side effect that was really nice for me is like I was able to build a connection or social network very quickly internally that helped me out on, knowing who to ask for if I needed something, let's say, right? So I know this person works on this area, so if I need to dive deeper into something, I will go talk to them, right? And so on and so forth, right? So this was also very important. My advice here is, regardless of the level that you're on, when you switch to a new context, new team, new whatever, go and talk to people. Just introduce yourself, right? And do that as early as you can. All right, and then the final piece, the final goal for the early stage of my onboarding, in my perspective, was build your own context, right? So far, people have told me, hey, we have these things, this is how this works, blah, 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 blah. I wanted to see for myself, right? I wanted to become proficient and to be able to navigate the space on my own without requiring support all the time, right? So are you familiar with your team's repositories, right? Do you know where to locate pieces of logic for certain, I don't know, critical features or whatever? If you need to review, the RFC of tech or tech design of something, like, do you know where to find out those things, right? So yeah, I wanted to have like some time alone, let's say, to figure this out myself. Okay. So yeah, first thing I did is I studied the code base, and by this I don't mean that I actually learn all the code, right? But I did take time to clone all the relevant repositories and go through the code on my own, right? Try to reverse engineer a little bit, right? What all these engineers had told me, right, on the interviews, right? Kind of like translated myself on, okay, this piece of code goes here into these packets and blah, 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 right? So I did that. And then another thing that I did, and I guess, this is also a byproduct of all these conversations, was, I quickly realized that I had to change the way I was taking notes, right? And I'm going to tell you why. So basically, when I was back at Amazon, and this is a true story, right? When I was back at Amazon, my note-taking method consisted on just having one single notes.txt file on my desktop, right, where everything went, right? Everything was crammed in there, right? And then soon after having some time here at Glovo, and talking to all these people and learning all these things, right? Soon I realized, like the amount of context, that I need to have to be effective is so big that I cannot just put it on one single file, right? It's just like, that's not gonna be effective, right? I needed to structure the way I took notes, so I could refer to things and recover things, later on in an efficient way, right? So I put some engineering work as well into this, okay? So here, what I'm showing here is like, these are my notes on one of these like study sessions that I had with one of the code bases, or well, in this case, not a code base, but an area, let's say, of the monolith for operational pricing, right? And this is, I don't use this, okay, like every day, but this is, like I switched, like the tool that I use for note taking, right? And essentially with that tool, you can kind of like link notes to one another, right? So you end up like building like a knowledge graph in a way, and this tool kind of like, lets you see that graph in, in a visual way like this. I think I only use this for the context of this talk and getting the screenshot right. But essentially, I am able now with different means in the same app, right, to kind of like relate things together, right? So if I want to know, let's say I need to give feedback on someone, right? I pull my notes for that person, right? And then what I go is like, hey, give me all the notes, that link to this person. And that will give me all the context of all the things that I've ever worked with this person, right? That will help me on refreshing, our interactions, for example, because I would reread the notes, right? And therefore, my feedback, hopefully, would be much more direct, based on data, right? And not like super high level. That's one thing, right? I could do other things, like what I was working in March, for example. What things did I have on my plate on March of last year, right? I could do the same thing. And the same thing for projects or systems or something, right? Like what happens if I want to know what I have done to help the discounts team? I could do that easily, right? All right, moving on. Middle stage, yeah. Next phase for me was, okay, now I'm more or less familiar with the space. I'm gonna just try to help people out somehow. And the first thing for me was, getting people to notice you, right? And collaborate with you, giving visibility to your work. So people, and especially your manager, right, knew what you were doing, right? And getting some feedback, right? So getting people to notice you, right? So as a staff engineer, right, like sometimes you lead, but many times you are supporting people, right? And then you need to, like, how can you help people, effectively if they don't know that you exist, or if they don't know what value do you add, right? Or if they are not willing to approach you because, I don't know, maybe they don't find you friendly or open or available enough, right? So you need to do something so these people are aware that you're there and they can talk to you and that you're going to try to help them as much as you can, okay? So I started by looking at pull requests, right? So at the very beginning, I was getting 0 pull requests as a reviewer. And I guess that makes sense because I am not allocated to any specific team, right? So what I did is I just went around and I discovered all of the GitHub teams for my teams, right, at Glovo, right? And then I joined those GitHub teams, and then I subscribed to everything that was happening, right? It was crazy, but it was unnecessarily evil for me, right? So what I did is I made myself, I forced, let's say, myself to make sure that I reviewed at least 1 pull request per team per day at the beginning, right? Just to make myself present, right? I would use that as a learning opportunity of certain things, but also maybe offer some very light feedback at the beginning, right? So people would know, they would see at least my face on a picture on GitHub, okay? Then I started doing the same thing for other documents, right? System designs, RFCs, whatever document came my way, right? I would review it, and if I had something to say it, right, I would say it, right? So again, people would feel my presence in a nice way, okay? I'm not saying like I was just like crazy going, I don't know, saying people like this is wrong or whatever, right? But I was just present into things, right? It was important for me. And then finally, the most important bit is, that I did all of this with this mentality in mind, right? That this is something that I learned back at my time at Amazon, right? Which is respect what came before, right? It is very easy for you as an engineer, if you jump into a new code base or a new team or a new company, right? You start looking at the code and the systems, etc., right? It is very easy for you to focus and spot only on the bad parts, right? Like, oh, like this code makes no sense, like who wrote this, right? Or like, why are we not catching, this thing via Redis, right? And we go directly to the database, right? So instead of like fronting these things or confronting these things with that attitude, right? I think it's better to start with a position of empathy, right? So you need to understand that the people who wrote that code, right, they made the best decision that they could with the constraints that they had at the time, right? So maybe the code was a little bit spaghetti because they had to deliver it, right, as soon as possible to the customer, right? Or maybe they couldn't put like a Redis cache in there because simply the company didn't have budget for it at the time, right? So you need to kind of like pause your initial reactions, right? Especially when you start looking into these things for the first time. And first start with a position, again, of respect and empathy, right? And I want to show you very quickly, right? So this is one of my first ever comments on a pull request, but I use this, as a learning opportunity, hey, like, where is this tracing resource group thing? I have no idea. And then I have some nice people here, like, helping me out. Then I have this, which is like, I think the first ever pull request comment, which is kind of like feedback, right? That I left for one of the teams here at Glovo, right? It was like super minor, super light, just turn this list into a set, please, and everything was fine, right? Here, like, one of my first comments on, on some docs, right? The important bit is the first thing here, right? Is like, this is how you start from a part of like, hey, I'm not trying to disrupt anything here for now. I'm just trying to learn and help what I can, right? So being very polite, etc. Yeah, and this is another example. All right, next, giving visibility to your work, right? So you're a staff engineer, right? You have to take care of 8 or more teams, even more, right? Depending. So you're very busy, right? So if you're very busy, just think about your manager, right? Like, that person is going to be even more busy, right? So you need to be able to work with autonomy, right? Like, do whatever you want, let's say, do whatever you think, right? It's important, right? But you need to make sure that you give the opportunity to your manager to, understand a little bit more in detail what you're doing, right? If they need to, right? And also, give them the opportunity to make sure that you are aligned, right? Like, you and your manager, right? So if something is strange, let's say, they could talk to you, right? So 2 things I did. First of all, I agreed on the process. I sat down with my manager at the time. I was like, hey, what is the best way for me to give you visibility without, impacting your day-to-day, let's say, right? And we came up with this 515 thing. I mean, it's not like we invented it, right? It's like more, we copied this from, what other staff engineers were doing, right? So this 515 is an email, right? That I write after agreeing with my manager, right? That I write every Friday, right? And essentially it's a summary of what I did on the week, right? And where I found some blockers or the outcomes, etc., right? And the only constraints for this email is like, it should not take me more than 15 minutes to write, and it should not take my manager more than 5 minutes to read it, okay? So it should be concise, right, and to the point. And yeah, so essentially this is how I give visibility to my manager, both with Rafa and now with Ciro, right? And this is, I think, my first ever email of this type, right? Very concise, just a bunch of like bullet points and links if if the manager wants to keep reading more. All right, and finally on the middle stage, right? The last thing I wanted to do is, asking for feedback, right? Am I doing okay? Sure, I learned about my, at the beginning of my first days, I learned about the staff engineer role, etc. But I am now contributing a little bit, right? And at this stage, the feedback for me was more like, what I'm interested in is like, hey, I'm doing something like obviously wrong, right? Just please let me know now before you fire me, right? So I can quickly correct, right? So there is nothing special about this. It's just, just ask for feedback, right? Very directly, right? And I'll show you how I did it. It's just like, I went to Slack and I talked to people and, hey, I want feedback, right? Again, sorry for the Spanish. Like, this was essentially me talking to someone where we were about to jump into a one-on-one. I was like, hey, my main interest here is to ask for feedback. Okay. All right, and we're approaching the end. Okay, I think we've got time. I'll go a little bit quicker here. So later stage, again, you are now at a stage where you feel you have the context, right? You're starting to help people a little bit. You get, you get a feeling that you can do more, let's say, right? So that is for me the late stage of the onboarding. And I have 3 goals: staying hands-on, right? Finding problems and prioritizing work, and pushing through friction, right? So staying hands-on, this is essentially, you need to keep going. At least from my perspective, in my humble opinion, as an engineer, no matter what level you're at, you need to keep going, right? And the reason is because, like, once you jump into a staff engineer and above, what happens is a lot of people start consuming your time, right? They put you meetings, one-on-ones, they ask you to review documents, etc., right? And what happens is it is very easy for you to kind of like give your time away to all of these people, right? Which is fine. You're supposed to support them, right? But you can fall into the trap of like giving all your time to these people, right? And then what happens is it gets to a point where you realize, you know what, like, I haven't written a single line of code in 1 year, right? And when you get to that point, it might impact your performance as a staff engineer, because, if you haven't written code in 1 year and you're helping people on maybe, I don't know, improving the development experience or making decisions, right? You're thinking and proposing solutions with, the DevX experience that you experienced for the last time, which was 1 year ago, right? And what these people are doing today, right, and the way they develop code might have changed and drifted since you last submitted your last pull request, right? So when you do this analysis or help people out and have discussions, if you don't live the same reality as they do, right, like I don't think you're going to be as effective as you can, right? Because you won't have the same problems in your head, right? That is, for example, one of the reasons why I contributed to, the monolith extraction, for example. It's not a job that is like, or a work that is like super pleasant, right? But, I knew like most of my teams had to do that work, right? And I knew I wanted to understand their problems and be able to help them better, right? So no tricks here. It's just like make sure that you protect some time, let's say, to keep coding, right? And yeah, this is, again, I'm showing you a couple of things. So on the above is just like the meeting notes for a one-on-one that I had with my manager at the time. I started like very side, like, hey, is it okay if I can block one day for coding, right? And my manager was like, just do whatever you want, right? Like if you feel you need to do more, right? So yeah, now I don't block code. I don't block time for coding. I just go and code whenever I think it's needed, right? And the below thing is the typical GitHub. I don't know how this thing is called, but like the activity graph or something. I don't care about the levels of the greens or whatever. It's just like I see some green, right? And that's good for me, right? And consistent green, let's say, more or less, right? Except maybe no goes where I was on holidays, blah, blah, but like on my day to day, I still to contribute. And that is the way it's important for me, right? All right. Okay. Second kind of like problem is, second goal for me in the late stage was to be able to find problems and prioritizing them, right? So yeah, you have maybe your company has OKRs or have certain goals, right? So those things will give you direction, right? But then it might happen, that your teams are so focused on delivering the next feature, right? That they are not looking at things that are important as well, right? Maybe you should be the person who looks into these things, right? At least that is kind of like the approach that I've taken so far, right? So, do you know what are the important problems and how to, which ones goes first, right? So couple of things that I did, right? So first of all, reading a lot, right? Everything that came through me, I would read it. I didn't care if it was like a doc first from one team or another. I would read a lot, especially at the beginning, right? And that helped you on kind of like, sometimes at least, that helps you on connecting dots, right? So maybe you read a document from one team on your cluster that is solving a problem that, resonates with you from some other document that you read from another team on the other corner of your cluster, right? And maybe you can sit down and tackle that same problem in just once, right? Instead of like doing it twice, right? Now I had to come up as well with a way to kind of like organize all this work, right? What I ended up realizing is like there are 1,000 things that I could be doing here at Glovo, right? Like there are 1 billion things, right? That can be, improved or created or whatever, right? So I put together a basic way or a basic kind of like triage kind of like a method for me. I had 3 boxes of work. I had like the now, which are just the things that I'm working on at any given time, right now. And I only have 2 at the time. I like beyond 2 things at a time is like I don't know. This is how it works. Like I cannot keep up with more than 3 items at the same time. Let's say, right? Then I have the later, which are things that I think are important, and I will start working on immediately after I free some capacity from the now. And then I have the someday, right? Which is things that I think are important, but if I put them on hold for maybe a few weeks or a few months, right? No one will die, right? And then what I do is I have a weekly kind of like 15 minutes block where I review these goals, right? And what I do is I move things around from one box to the other, right? Based on the things that I've learned during the week, right? So maybe at the beginning of the week, I was working on one thing, right? And in the middle of the week, someone mentioned something like, hey, suddenly, I don't know, this is top priority or whatever, right? Or I discover something that is even more important that I was working on. And at the end of the week, I move things around so I can, keep a sense of priority. Very quickly, this is just a snapshot of like the to-do kind of like app that I use, right? So still I have the today, which is the now for me, right? I have the upcoming, which is the later, and someday, which is someday, right? And this anytime thing I don't use. What I do use a lot is inbox, right? Which is essentially here I put all the things that are happening through my mind, like, oh, maybe I should look into this someday. Maybe I should look into this, maybe blah, blah, blah. I put them on this inbox, right? That's kind of like ideas that are pending to be further analyzed, right? And at some point I would kind of like go through them. I'm kind of like formalize them in a task, and then I move them to the right box, okay? And this is just a screenshot of my 5 p.m. meeting with myself every Friday to organize these things, okay? All right, and then finally, okay, I have 2 minutes. I'll go very quick, right? Finally, another thing that was very important for me was this concept of like pushing through friction, right? So this is what happens, right? You typically land on a new team, right? New context, right? And you start with a fresh set of eyes, right? So you are able to spot things that maybe other people are not looking at simply because they didn't have the need or the time or they didn't find it like a problem, right? And the typical case is like imagine you go to a team and suddenly your CI/CD pipeline takes 6 hours, right? And you may ask the question as like something like, hey, like why is it taking so long, right? Some people could say like, yeah, it's a problem, but we couldn't look at it so far. Like we have other priorities. Other people would say like, I don't know, man. Like, is this really a problem? Like it's always been like this, right? And these situations, right, when you receive that kind of feedback from the people who've been on the team longer, this is what I want to call like friction, right? And my message to you here is like I would ask you to kindly push through this friction, especially during your onboarding period, because that's when you have like the fresher look into things, right? And there's also one thing that happens, which is when you join a new team, right? You have like a grace period where people don't expect much of you, right? Let's say like, yeah, Jaime is slow because he's just learning, he's just joining Glovo, he's just ramping up, so he needs some time, right? Blah, blah, blah. So when no one is looking, let's say, right, during this period, I found to me that this is one of the best moments, let's say, to tackle certain things, right? And when you're in that mindset, like, hey, let's fix something, right? The first thing that I would advise you is just search for the low-hanging fruit, right? If you're jumping on a team where people have been working, for a few years or whatever, and they have like a very packed roadmap, there are chances they haven't looked at things because they didn't have time, right? So if you start looking at those things, the first thing that you're going to notice is, you're going to probably find things that, will give you a lot of like return on your investment, because just fixing those things may take you maybe 1 or 2 days, right? So focus on that first, right? Deliver the maximum amount of value at the beginning with the minimum amount of effort, right? If you can identify those things, that would be great. And then what I said is just try it, right? Sometimes I feel people that they find these things and they're like, but I'm just new. Like, how can I do this? Like I need to ask my manager or whatever. I would say use that grace period to test the waters, right? Maybe start with something slow, or maybe ask for feedback if you're going to go, do something crazy. But just do it, right? And then finally, on pushing through friction, this is a topic on its own. I would recommend you to go through this blog, and there is a talk by this person, Daniel, which is amazing. So if you're interested in knowing more about it and techniques to go through that, just read this. And yeah, that's all I have. Okay, yeah. I went 1 minute on.
Thank you, Jaime. Thank you, Jaime, so much. I mean, it was so interesting, so packed up, and like it was one of the most popular today, as I've seen, because we had like up to 100 participants, and we have a few questions in Q&A. So I don't know if you see them or I should be reading them. Do you see at the Q&A section at the many?
Yeah, I see the
questions. Do you want to take some of them?
Yeah, I mean, but if whomever is here, like feel free to drop, because I know we're over time. Okay, I'll stay. I don't mind. So the first question is, what is the most challenging task you have had in Glovo? What partially do you love in your current role? Okay, so the most challenging task, I think it was kind of very recent, and I don't think it was a task. It was more like an investigation process, which is one of the services that we own essentially was having problems where it was browning out every Sunday predictably, right? At around 9 p.m., like at peak, right? Let's say, right? The dinner time, right? So essentially there was a problem with the cache, right? And it got to a point where I was like, what is happening there, right? So I jumped and helped the team, right? Essentially supported the team, right? Into kind of like adding the right monitoring or visibility on the operations on the cache until we found, that we had some hotkeys, etc. And then we kind of like fixed it. So that was like very challenging. It was the first time of my career. Like this is funny, right? Like for me, you jump into you start on a company like Amazon, for example, which is like super big, right? And they tell you about scale and etc. Right? All these things. That sounds like super interesting. But then when you're actually working there, right? What's happening is like some of these things are already solved for you, right? Like I saw 0 scale problems at Amazon. But then I go to Glovo, which is a much smaller company. And this is one of the first places in my career where I'm like, oh, you know what? Like, this is actually challenging, right? Like this is a problem that was solved already by other people at Amazon, but I now get to solve it here, right? With other people, of course, not on my own, right? And that is the answer to the second question. That is the kind of thing that I love about this role here at Glovo. Okay, I'll go with the next question. Have you always been good at public speaking, or you had to exercise skill? Systems could you give to people? Blah, blah. Okay, so yeah, Maciek, good question. I don't know whether I'm good or not. All I know is like I don't like talking in public at all. I hate it. I'm very introvert, right? So I had to. What I do is when I see an opportunity like this one, right, like this conference, right, I just go and put some topic quickly without thinking it too much, right? I submit my paper very quickly, and then I wait and see if they select me. I'm like, okay, I have to do this thing, and it's just like everything in life, like practice, nothing else. Okay. And suggestions, yeah, just as I said on my last slide, just try, like don't be shy, just put your name there and see what happens. Like at the end is like most of the things are scary in our head, but then not so much in real life. All right, next question: how do you deal with stress during a presentation? I don't have an answer. I'm sorry. I get very stressed at the very beginning, but then when I start speaking, typically, I don't have a lot of stress. I also rehearse a lot, I have to say, before I go and present. And how does collaboration of a staff engineer with principal engineer looks like? This one is difficult. I mean, not difficult. It's very easy, but I don't have like a super good answer, right? It's just like, in this case, I've worked so far. I would say out of the principals that we have today, I work closely with Fanta, let's say, or the one with I've worked the most, right? And in this particular case, he's super approachable. It's just one of us, let's say, and it's just like a peer, right? Really. So yeah, it's been super easy for me so far. And I think that's it.
Yeah, we covered them all. I don't know if people do still have any questions. Would you like to raise a hand or place them here? Just a few more seconds. I don't see anything more coming. I mean, you're with us, so I guess you can be approached at any time and like
just
anyone.
Of course. Yeah, for sure. Don't worry about that.
So, have I seen something? No, there's one more. Like, I don't know if you want to still take it.
Okay, I'll take this one because I think it's interesting. So as a staff engineer, are you expected to know a lot of things? And if no, like how do you deal with these expectations? So I deal with this. So I guess you're expected to know things, but it's more a matter of like the time that you've been working on this industry more than you're supposed to be like a super expert engineer on everything, right? So again, at the beginning of the talk, I said, like these are my comfort areas, right? And those were distributed systems and backend because that's what I've been focusing on, right? But it happens like super often that you need to help, a team on something where you have no idea because you've never worked with that before. And the way that I do that is I jump to the team and I'm like, hey, I am just one more person, right? I want to help you out, right? I need some ramp up on this technology, maybe 2 or 3 days to read something, right? And then let's see how it goes, right? So you take things like being humble, like you're an engineer, and I keep the spirit from my first days, like, okay, I don't know about this, but I'll try to help. I'll read a little bit and see what happens. And yeah, Rafael Aguilar, I guess the answer is yes. I don't know. Let's talk if you want.
So I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you very much again, Jaime. It was really interesting presentation. Also from my perspective, like being new to the company, and I learned some stuff along the way, which I heard you more earlier. Anyways, again, thank you very much, and see you going forward in the company.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good day.